Ladies and gentlemen, here is an introduction for your motivational speech inspired by Shi Heng Yi's calm and spiritual style, with the topic, "When women focus on yourself and stay silent, everything falls into place." There is a quiet power that arises when a woman chooses herself, not out of pride, not out of rebellion, but from a place of deep awareness. In a world that constantly demands your attention, your reaction, your validation, silence becomes sacred, and focus becomes your shield. You were not born to constantly explain yourself, to please, or to prove. You were born to become. Today, I invite you to come back to that center, to the calm space within you that already knows the way. When a woman stops chasing noise and begins to listen to her own breath, her own path, her own inner wisdom, something remarkable begins to happen. Without fighting for control, she begins to embody it. Without raising her voice, she is heard by those who truly see. Without needing the spotlight, she begins to shine. This is not a journey of withdrawal. It is a return to self, a return to strength, a return to silence that speaks louder than words. Let us walk this path together, because when you focus on yourself and stay silent, everything that is meant for you begins to find its way. Silence is not weakness. It is inner mastery and strength in motion. This idea challenges a common misconception in modern society, where loudness is often equated with confidence, and silence is misread as insecurity or passivity. But there is a sacred depth in silence, especially when it is chosen deliberately. For women, this silence is not about suppression. It is about rising above noise, distraction, and external expectations. It is about withdrawing from the endless tug-of-war of opinions and arguments, and stepping into a space where real power is born, not from the mouth, but from the mind and heart. When a woman becomes silent, not because she has nothing to say, but because she is choosing to listen inward, she enters a realm of self-mastery that cannot be easily shaken. She no longer reacts out of impulse. She no longer needs to defend her worth. She no longer measures her value based on how much she is seen or heard. Instead, her silence becomes a declaration of stability. It speaks of a grounded spirit, one that does not need noise to feel alive. It speaks of discipline, patience, and awareness. In a world that often encourages women to explain themselves, justify their choices, and compete for attention, silence becomes a radical act. It is a rejection of the belief that value must be visible. It is the understanding that true strength can be felt without a single word, like a mountain that stands still while the storm rages around it. A woman who embraces silence becomes immovable. She observes instead of reacting. She listens to her intuition instead of the opinions of others. She waits, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. This kind of silence is not empty. It is full of awareness, reflection, healing, and alignment. It is the silence that allows her to recognize what she truly wants, rather than what she's been told to want. It is in this quiet that she sees the patterns that have kept her stuck, the habits that no longer serve her, and the relationships that drain her. She begins to move differently, not louder, but with more purpose, not faster, but with more intention. Her energy becomes focused. Her time becomes sacred. She speaks less, but when she does speak, her words carry weight. When a woman cultivates this inner silence, she becomes deeply tuned into herself. She can sense when something is not right without needing proof. She can detect manipulation or dishonesty without confrontation. She no longer falls into the trap of over-explaining or oversharing. She doesn't give everyone access to her thoughts, because she has learned that her peace is too valuable to be placed in careless hands. This is not about isolation, but about discernment. It's about choosing where her energy flows and what truly deserves her attention. There is a graceful power that comes from a woman who knows she doesn't have to announce her worth. Her presence does that for her. Her silence is not passive. It is active, alive, and aware. It allows her to observe the truth behind people's words, to notice the dynamics in a room without needing to dominate it. She watches how others treat her in her silence, and through this, she learns who genuinely respects her and who only values her when she's performing. This silence is also a spiritual practice. It is a returning to herself and to the present moment. It invites her to be still long enough to feel her emotions, process her experiences, and reconnect with her purpose. It creates space for divine guidance. It opens doors to clarity. It allows her to breathe more deeply, to walk more freely, and to live with more intention. Focusing inward creates clarity that eliminates unnecessary chaos. In a world full of distractions, constant notifications, opinions, comparisons, and the noise of expectation, a woman can easily lose sight of who she truly is. The mind becomes cluttered with what everyone else wants, thinks, or demands, and somewhere in that noise, her own voice becomes faint. The moment she chooses to focus inward, she begins the journey of coming back to herself. This inward focus is not selfishness, it is self-respect. It is a deep commitment to seeing, hearing, and honoring her own soul before the world shapes her into something she is not. When a woman shifts her gaze from the outside world to the inner world, the fog begins to lift. She begins to ask different questions, not what do they think of me, but what do I think of myself? Not am I good enough for them, but are they aligned with who I truly am? She no longer looks outward for direction because she begins to understand that the answers she seeks have always lived within her. Her heart becomes her compass. Her intuition becomes her guide. And suddenly, decisions that once brought anxiety now feel peaceful because they are rooted in her own truth rather than someone else's version of success. Focusing inward brings attention to patterns that have been ignored or overlooked. She starts to notice how certain environments drain her energy, how certain people disturb her peace, how certain habits keep her from growing. These realizations don't come from chaos, they come from stillness. When she is no longer busy trying to please, perform, or prove, she can finally observe with clarity. The chaos that once seemed normal starts to feel intolerable, not because the world changed, but because her awareness did. She can no longer accept what she used to tolerate because she now sees it for what it truly is. This clarity is not immediate, but it is powerful. With time and silence, layers begin to fall away. The roles she thought she had to play, the perfect partner, the always available friend, the tireless worker, begin to dissolve. She sees that many of these roles were masks, created to survive, to be liked, to avoid conflict. But when she focuses inward, she no longer fears conflict if truth is on the other side. She no longer fears being misunderstood if it means being real. She begins to choose peace over performance, purpose over pressure. As her focus deepens, she begins to create space in her life. Space to think, space to breathe, space to feel. The clutter of obligations, overcommitments, and external noise is slowly cleared away. Her calendar reflects her priorities. Her conversations become more meaningful. Her relationships shift. Some fall away, others deepen. She doesn't chase or beg, because she knows what she brings. She knows that clarity repels confusion, and alignment cannot coexist with disorder. The more inward she goes, the more outer chaos loses its power over her. This journey of inward focus also brings emotional clarity. She learns to sit with her feelings rather than escape them. Anger, sadness, fear, these are no longer enemies but signals. She observes them, understands their roots, and allows them to move through her instead of getting stuck. She no longer numbs or distracts herself. She allows discomfort to teach her rather than scare her. This emotional maturity gives her strength that is calm, steady, and unshakable. Focusing inward also brings her closer to the present. She is not trapped in the past, reliving regrets, or obsessed with the future, fearing the unknown. She exists here now in her body, in her breath. The racing thoughts begin to slow. The need to control begins to soften. In that space of inner clarity, she realizes that not everything requires her reaction, not everything deserves her energy, and not everything needs to be fixed. Some things just need to be released, and some things never belonged to her in the first place. Detachment from external validation allows true self-worth to rise. From an early age, many women are conditioned to seek approval from parents, teachers, peers, society. Compliments become a form of currency, and criticism becomes a wound that lingers long after the words are spoken. This pattern of needing affirmation creates a loop where self-worth becomes tied to how others perceive you. But there comes a moment when a woman begins to question this script. She starts to ask herself what remains of her identity when the applause stops, when no one is watching, when there is no external validation to chase. That is where the awakening begins. Detaching from external validation does not mean becoming cold or indifferent. It means choosing to value inner truth over outer praise. It means trusting your decisions even when others don't understand them. It means creating a life that feels good on the inside rather than one that only looks good on the outside. For a woman, this detachment is both liberating and unfamiliar. At first, it may feel like walking through fog, unsure and uncertain, because the feedback loop is gone. But slowly, as she stops depending on approval, something deeper starts to take root, her own voice. Without the constant noise of opinions, she starts to hear her intuition more clearly. She begins to understand that worth is not earned through perfection or performance. It simply is. It has always been there, buried under layers of comparison, insecurity, and societal pressure. As she peels back those layers, what emerges is not arrogance or superiority, but calm certainty. She no longer asks, "Do they like me?" but instead, "Do I like who I'm becoming?" She no longer chases validation because she has found something more valuable, self-respect. When a woman detaches from external validation, she also becomes less reactive. She is not shaken by praise nor destroyed by criticism. Both are seen as temporary, external energies that do not define her essence. She understands that one day she will be celebrated, and the next she may be misunderstood, and that neither state changes her worth. This stability creates inner peace. It allows her to stay grounded, to move with intention rather than impulse, and to make decisions not for approval but for alignment. This detachment also changes how she shows up in relationships. She no longer bends herself to fit someone else's ideal. She no longer overextends to be accepted. She no longer stays silent to avoid disapproval. Instead, she becomes authentic. She speaks with honesty, not aggression. She holds boundaries with love, not fear. She gives without losing herself and receives without guilt. Relationships become a reflection of mutual respect rather than a stage for validation seeking, and those who cannot accept her truth naturally fall away, while those meant to walk with her come closer. Letting go of external validation also transforms how she views failure and success. Failure is no longer a blow to her identity, but a necessary part of learning. Success is no longer about recognition, but about alignment with her purpose. She begins to measure her growth by how she feels internally, more peaceful, more whole, more grounded, not by how many people applaud her. She redefines what it means to succeed. It is no longer about impressing others, but about being faithful to herself. Even her daily choices begin to shift. She dresses for her own joy, not for the gaze of others. She speaks not to be liked, but to be truthful. She chooses stillness over performing. She honors rest instead of burning out for validation. And slowly, her life becomes a reflection of her soul, not a projection curated to please. She becomes rooted in herself, and from that root, a quiet but unshakable self-worth begins to grow. Stillness becomes the gateway to alignment with divine timing. In a culture that glorifies hustle, constant action, and rapid results, stillness can feel uncomfortable, even threatening. But there is a different kind of power in stillness, a power that is not about doing more, but about listening more deeply. For a woman who has been told her value comes from how much she gives, how busy she is, how productive she appears, stillness is a form of rebellion. It is the moment she chooses to pause, to breathe, and to align her energy with something greater than urgency. In stillness, she begins to notice the patterns of her own life, the cycles, the emotional waves, the rise and fall of desires. She notices how often she has pushed, chased, or forced things out of fear, impatience, or insecurity. She remembers the exhaustion that came from trying to control outcomes, from trying to speed up timelines that were never hers to control. And in that quiet awareness, something within her begins to soften. She starts to release the pressure to always be ahead, to always be doing, and instead starts to trust that her life is unfolding in ways her mind cannot yet understand. Stillness invites her to become an observer of her own life rather than a frantic participant. It is not passivity, it is presence. In stillness, she does not shut down. She becomes more awake, more receptive, more open to the subtle signs that are often missed in noise and chaos. She begins to sense when something is not aligned, even if it looks good on paper. She begins to feel when it's time to rest, when it's time to move, and when it's time to wait. And in this space, divine timing begins to speak. Divine timing is not the timeline of the ego. It is not bound by the demands of others or the deadlines of the world. It is deeply connected to purpose, to growth, to unseen forces working behind the scenes. When a woman learns to dwell in stillness, she starts to align with this timing, not because she figured everything out, but because she stopped resisting the flow. She no longer asks, "Why is it taking so long?" but instead, "What am I being prepared for?" She no longer rushes into decisions out of anxiety, but allows clarity to arise naturally. This alignment does not happen through control. It happens through surrender, and surrender requires trust, trust in herself, trust in life, trust in a higher wisdom. Stillness gives her the space to build that trust. She learns that delays are not denials, that detours are often protection, that closed doors can be guidance. She starts to see her life not as a series of random events, but as a carefully woven story, with each pause holding meaning, each setback carrying instruction. Stillness also deepens her relationship with her intuition. In the silence, her inner voice becomes louder. She hears the whispers that get drowned out in busyness, the nudges, the warnings, the confirmations. She no longer needs to look outside for every answer because she has created space to receive from within. Her body becomes a compass, her dreams become messages, her heart becomes a sacred guide. Even in her outward actions, there is a sense of divine rhythm. She moves with intention, not urgency. She speaks with clarity, not reaction. She waits without shrinking and acts without rushing. Her timing becomes different, less frantic, more fluid. People may not understand her pace, but she is no longer seeking validation from speed. She is seeking alignment with something higher, something timeless. In that space of stillness, life begins to meet her halfway. Opportunities appear not because she chased them, but because she became ready. Relationships evolve or dissolve not because she forced them, but because her energy shifted. She starts to realize that the most important changes happen not when she is striving, but when she is still. Energy once spent on proving becomes fuel for personal growth. A woman often finds herself in environments where she feels the need to constantly prove her worth, her intelligence, her beauty, her strength. This conditioning can be subtle or loud, but its effect is deeply rooted. It becomes a constant background noise that influences how she speaks, how she walks into a room, how she makes decisions. The desire to be accepted, to be seen as enough, to be acknowledged can lead her to overextend, overachieve, overcompensate. But over time, this effort becomes exhausting. It drains her. It disconnects her from herself. She realizes that the proving never ends because it was never meant to at some point. There is a shift. She begins to question why she is constantly trying to prove her worth and to whom. She starts to observe the people she is performing for and whether their approval is even necessary. This awakening is subtle but profound. She notices how much energy she has been giving away, energy that could have been directed inward toward building, healing, and evolving. She begins to see that her constant output was not always an expression of love or purpose, but often a silent plea to be enough in the eyes of others. With this awareness comes the power to redirect. The moment she chooses to stop proving is the moment she starts growing. Growth no longer comes from external achievements meant to impress others, but from internal transformations that align with her truth. She starts asking different questions, not how do I show them I'm worthy, but what does being worthy mean to me, and not how do I win their respect. But do I respect myself in this decision? These shifts create a deep change in how she uses her energy. Instead of being scattered across dozens of performances, it becomes focused and rooted. This focused energy is transformative. She begins to notice how her mental clarity sharpens, how her emotional stability deepens, and how her physical well-being improves. Without the weight of constant proving, she feels lighter, more present. She is no longer anxiously anticipating how others will react. She is listening to how she feels, how her body responds, how her soul speaks. Her decisions begin to come from within, not from fear or the desire to be validated. As this energy turns inward, she creates space for self-investment. She picks up the book she once ignored. She sits in meditation instead of arguing. She creates art, starts the project, writes the journal. She explores not to show others what she's doing, but to connect more deeply with her essence. Her focus shifts from performance to process, from perfection to progress. She no longer waits for applause to begin. She no longer needs to be seen to feel real. She becomes her own witness, her own mirror, her own validation. This inner growth begins to reflect outward. The confidence she once tried to project now emanates naturally. It doesn't come from proving but from knowing who she is, knowing what she values, knowing that she doesn't need to compete or compare. She sees other women not as threats but as mirrors and allies. She lifts instead of competes. She listens instead of reacts, and she becomes a safe space for herself and for others. The growth also becomes spiritual. She begins to feel a deeper connection to something larger than herself. She understands that her life has rhythm and purpose, and she doesn't have to earn that purpose through performance. She allows grace to flow into her life. She forgives herself for the years she spent proving. She honors the survival instincts that kept her going, and she chooses to begin again, not from emptiness, but from fullness, from freedom, from intention. Her journey becomes less about proving her power and more about embodying it in silence and self-focus. The right people, opportunities, and peace naturally align. When a woman turns her attention inward and quiets the noise around her, she begins to create a powerful shift in the energy she emits. No longer caught in the cycle of chasing, convincing, or explaining, she instead becomes rooted in her own presence. This presence is magnetic not because she demands attention, but because she no longer needs it. Her silence speaks of depth. Her self-focus speaks of wholeness. She begins to live in a way that draws rather than pursues, that attracts rather than persuades. This kind of alignment does not come from force. It arises from authenticity. As she begins to know herself more deeply, she naturally begins to make choices that reflect her inner truth. The things she once tolerated begin to fall away. The people who once drained her energy become distant memories. Her environment shifts, not because she is changing others, but because she is transforming the frequency she lives on. Her silence creates space for what is real. Her self-focus acts like a filter, allowing only what is in harmony with her growth to remain in this space. The right people begin to arrive. These are not people who are attracted to her performance, but to her presence. They are drawn not to what she gives them, but to who she is when she is fully herself. These people do not require her to shrink, explain, or overextend. They meet her where she stands. They understand the value of quiet, the power of patience, and the strength in simply being. She begins to realize that she does not have to fight for love, respect, or understanding. When she becomes aligned with her own truth, the same pattern follows with opportunities. When she is in tune with herself, her decisions become clearer. She no longer says yes out of fear of missing out. She no longer clings to things that are misaligned. She no longer chases validation through titles or roles. Her energy becomes focused, intentional, refined. And in this refined space, the opportunities that come to her are not random. They are a reflection of the clarity within her. What once felt like striving now feels like alignment. She is no longer trying to make things happen. She is allowing them to unfold in their right time and form. Peace also begins to take root. Not because her external world is suddenly perfect, but because her internal world is no longer chaotic. She is not living on edge, trying to control everything around her. She is not constantly reacting, explaining, or proving. Her mind becomes quieter. Her emotions become steadier. She is able to sit in discomfort without losing herself. She finds peace not in circumstances, but in her own state of being. And this peace is not something fragile or temporary. It becomes a foundation. This new alignment also changes how she carries herself. She walks with a different energy. She does not need to dominate a room to be noticed. Her stillness does that for her. She does not need to speak constantly to be heard. Her presence communicates more than words ever could. She becomes grounded, untangled from the distractions that once consumed her. And others can feel it, not just through what she does, but through who she is becoming. This inner work, this commitment to silence and self-focus, is not easy. It requires letting go of old identities, stepping away from the need to be constantly available, constantly seen, constantly praised. But in doing so, she finds something more lasting. She finds alignment. She realizes that life is not meant to be chased. The things that are truly meant for her begin to find their way, not because she forced them, but because she prepared herself to receive them. Her energy speaks before she does. Her clarity clears paths she once tried to open with effort alone. And in that space, life begins to mirror her inner calm, her truth, her quiet power.